Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another edition of Ukraine This Week with me, Don Arlett. We have a special treat for you this week with the former president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, joins us on the program, so be sure to stay with us. Now let's start with the review of the most important events from the past week, straight from Ukraine. Ukrainian troops are pushing on with their fight in the long-contested Donetsk region, concentrating their efforts on the town of Toretsk. The Ukrainian military has now confirmed that the front line in the town has been held up successfully, as Russian forces entrench themselves on its eastern side.
Ukrainian forces have managed to stabilize the situation in the embattled town despite continued Russian pressure in the east, a military spokesperson has said. The local populace has fled in recent weeks as Russia has been escalating attacks in the area. Toretsk, located about 35 kilometers north of Russian-occupied Donetsk, has seen intense fighting in recent months as Russian forces push further eastward. The Ukrainian army has been holding back the advance and defending the town successfully. However, while Russian attacks have dropped off somewhat, there are concerns that it might signal a tactical pause to regroup and resupply. Local authorities estimate Ukraine controls 40 to 50% of the town, with the rest under Russian occupation. Previous reports highlighted brutal close-quarters combat along Toretsk main street. Loss of the city would be a significant setback for Ukraine in the Donetsk region, especially following its withdrawal from Vuhledar. Russian forces have also continued their advancement towards key logistical centers of Kurakove and Pokrovsk.
Russian attacks on Ukraine over recent days have resulted in significant casualties and damage across multiple regions. In the past days, at least 15 people were killed and over 61 others wounded, according to regional authorities.
Russian strikes targeting the Kharkiv region have killed 1 person and wounded 4.
The windows in our room fell out. There was dust, smoke. It cut off our electricity.
Further attacks in Kherson resulted in 2 deaths and multiple injuries. Ukrainian air defenses downed a significant number of Russian drones, including 57 Shahed units. Russian forces also fired cruise missiles targeting the cities of Zaporizhia and Kryvyi Rih.
It was just 100 meters away from me. I was scared. I thought my house was going to collapse. Now we have to sit here in case they hit us again.
In Sumy, a strike on Shostka killed 1 and injured 11, damaging schools and critical infrastructure. Despite ongoing Ukrainian defense efforts, the intensity of Russian assaults remains high across the east and south of Ukraine.
President Volodymyr Zelensky has announced that the U.S. will provide $800 million more in military aid to Ukraine, focused on strengthening the country's drone production.
Mr. President.
The announcement came after a meeting between Zelensky and U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in Kyiv, where an additional $400 million military assistance package was unveiled.
We face a hinge in history. If Ukraine falls under Putin's boot, all of Europe will fall under Putin's shadow.
The package includes HIMARS missile systems, 155mm artillery rounds, and training resources. Zelensky also emphasized the importance of maintaining Ukraine's own defense industry during his evening address. With winter approaching, Ukraine anticipates intensified Russian attacks on its energy infrastructure, echoing last year's strikes which attempted to deprive Ukrainians of both heating and electricity. Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, the U.S. has committed over $60 billion in security aid to Ukraine.
Ukrainian pilots continue training in the United Kingdom in a bid to strengthen the country's air defense. Pilots and maintenance crews have been training on the F-16 platform, donated by a coalition of foreign partners.
To date, British instructors have trained 200 Ukrainian pilots, according to the British Armed Forces. The accelerated training program has been implemented to meet the urgent need for enhanced air defense amid intensified Russian bombardments. Following basic training, Ukrainian pilots will move to more advanced courses with international partners. At the graduation ceremony, attended by Ukraine's ambassador to the UK, Valery Zaluzhny, who is also the former commander-in-chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, thanked London for its support, underscoring its importance for Ukraine's victory. Despite the progress, only 11 Ukrainian F-16 pilots are currently rated as flight-ready, far short of the 40 required for a full squadron. Ukraine received its first batch of the US-made jets in July, but a recent crash, which claimed the life of a top pilot Alexei, has raised concerns over the training pace and timeline.
As the war in Ukraine unfolds, the country's defense sector has experienced a technological revolution, and drones have become its forefront.
Ukraine has declared it has the technical expertise to produce drones and missiles essential for long-range strikes into Russian territory. But financial aid from Western allies remains paramount. Recent reports reveal the Ukrainian military's development of drones like the Lyudi, engineered to reach Russian military targets at distances over 600 kilometers. The drones, operated by Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Agency, can carry substantial payloads over hundreds of kilometers using programmed waypoints to bypass Russian air defenses. The use of decoys alongside strike drones is central to overwhelming anti-air systems, allowing precise targeting of critical assets like ammunition depots and oil refineries. Another new model, the Sting, is a kamikaze drone specifically designed to chase down and neutralize the Iranian-designed Shahed. The Sting is a first-person view, VR-operated weapon. Notably more cost-effective than the Shahed, the Sting could allow Ukraine to reduce its reliance on traditional air defense systems. A branch of Ukraine's armed forces dedicated to drone warfare aims to produce up to 1 million UAVs this year. But Russian air defenses still thwart many Ukrainian drone attacks. The success rate, according to a unit within the Ukrainian army, could be increased from 50% to 95%, but only utilizing Western-made weapons. Permission for such strikes, however, is nowhere in sight.
And now joining me to discuss the latest threads and trends in drone warfare in Ukraine is Federico Borsari, resident fellow, Transatlantic Defense and Security at the Center for European Policy Analysis. Hello, Federico, and thank you very much for joining me on Ukraine This Week.
Hello, Don, and thanks so much for having me. Good evening, everyone.
Now, you've been at this for a while. You've been looking at drones and the role that they're have served in Ukraine. As we look at the war through this lens, if you will, what do you think are the most important and promising technologies that we're seeing coming out of Ukraine right now?
Well, drone warfare has been certainly the first, let's say, indicator of the technological, pace of this conflict, and we have seen a lot of innovation in that space. Innovation cycles of few weeks, even few days sometimes. But certainly, what is emerging as a trend, I would say, is the use of small UAVs for especially strike missions, but also for air defense. And I would say that this last aspect that I mentioned is becoming more and more prominent across the front line, and especially Ukraine is showing a lot of interesting concept of operations and development and usage of small drones to basically destroy other type of drones that Russia uses to identify targets in Ukraine and provide intelligence and reconnaissance for its artillery and fires units, right? So the use of small drones by Ukraine is really very interesting in this type of application. And basically in the past few months we have seen hundreds of Russian UAVs that have been shot down by Ukrainian FPV drones. So Ukrainian operators and pilots are really, excelling in this field, and they are becoming really, really proficient. And this, I think, is one of the trends that is emerging, especially in the recent months in Ukraine.
Yeah, if you look at the high cost of Western air defenses that have been provided to Ukraine, I mean, you look at Patriot systems and IRSTs, then Well, it seems like sending drones up there in much larger quantities gives Ukrainians better chance at air defense and a little bit more bang for their buck. Will we see this trend develop and continue?
Yeah, I think so. I think that Ukraine has managed to find really a niche concept of operation and an application of drones. And it's a very cost-effective one. Of course, we're talking about, few hundreds, if perhaps 1,000, FPV drones that are used against larger systems that Russia used, and these Russian systems can cost sometimes even $150,000 right per unit. So if you use FPV drones that cost $500 or $1,000, your cost effectiveness is really great, and your cost per interception and the curve of that is really favoring Ukraine at this stage. I think this trend will continue, of course, because counter drone applications needs to be cost effective. That's the first parameter that you need to take into consideration when you look at the counter drone space. But at the same time, it's also clear that Russia is able to outproduce most of Western countries and most of NATO allies in terms of small and medium drones that are used for intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance. So this means that Russia can really produce thousands of these drones per month, and this is something that Western countries cannot do as of now. So that's certainly one of the priorities that NATO allies should look at when they are considering their own capability development plans and their strategy for the future.
Russia's secret G3 program came to light last week that they're using some factories in China either with or without the Chinese government's knowledge. It's hard to imagine the Chinese government wouldn't know about this. Subsequently, a few sanctions have been placed on the Chinese companies, I believe one Russian individual. Have you heard about this G3 program? What can you tell us about this type of system?
Yeah, it seems. The news was emerged actually a few weeks ago, and it seems indeed that Russia is relying on China for the production of additional one-way attack drones. Because apparently this type of drones are called Garpia. So G stands for Garpia, which is basically the name of the RP Eagle in Russia. In Russian, these drones are used for attacking Ukrainian targets together with Shahed or Geran one-way attack drones. And so apparently, based on the information that it's available, these are not very different from one another, meaning the Garpias and the Shahed. So they share a lot of similarities in terms of design, in terms of capabilities. But certainly, the help of China here means that Russia can continue to produce at scale this kind of systems, and perhaps relying on China for producing these systems means that some additional components or modifications in terms of the payload or the technology it can also happen. And so that means the Garpia could also be more advanced than the Shahed. We're talking about a system that, based on the intelligence that is available, is able to reach between 1,500 and 2,000 kilometers with a payload of 50 kilograms, which is not very different from the Shahed, because the Shahed has more or less a warhead that is 40 kilograms. But that means that Russia will be able to have, cheap, cost-effective attack systems that can use against Ukraine for a long time and at scale. And they can use these systems to basically make their strike packages against Ukraine much more complex to intercept, because they can mix these drones with cruise missiles, ballistic missiles. So it really becomes, a problem for Ukrainian air defenses that need to differentiate between so many different targets. So having China into the equation means that now the scale of production and the pace of production and the use of these drones can really increase a lot. So that means that Western countries need to take countermeasures to this and need to support Ukraine even more in the production of its own domestic drone capabilities and continue to fund that over time, I think.
Right now, also, we've seen images coming out of eastern Ukraine, the shooting down of, well, actually by a Russian pilot, of a Russian S-70 UAV. What is this, and what do we know about it? At first, there was being reported that it was actually a Russian jet shooting down another Russian jet, but we now know it's one of their more advanced drones. So could you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. The S-70 is basically a large flying wing unmanned combat air vehicle. Based on what we know, the wingspan is 20 meters. It has low observable or stealth features, including internal weapons carriage, in order to be less, detectable by radars and sensors. And it has been in development for decades. Actually, the development started in, more or less 15 years ago, probably more than that. But it has seen a lot of delays in terms of funding, in terms of, production capacity to scale up and really bring this system online. So apparently there are 3-4, prototypes that Russia has been testing in the past few years. There were, some sources announced that limited series production was to begin in the second half of this year, but actually we don't know much about that development, so we don't know if this is confirmed. But either way, the S-70 is certainly one of Russia's most advanced, drone systems, and I think that was a really embarrassing incident, basically, because the S-70 was probably conducting some kind of operational test to improve it, the concept of operation on how to employ it in high-intensity combat. So it's really likely that the drone lost the connection or the communication link with the operator or the ground control systems, and the Russians decided that it was too risky to allow it to fall into Ukrainian hands, and so they decided to shut it down. But we know also that the drone was loaded with at least one D30 glide precision munition, and so it indicates that it was likely being used for some kind of operational trials to test the sensors or the weapons, and it seems that the Russian needed really to shut it down because perhaps there was some sensitive technology in it. But at the end of the day, it fell into Ukrainian territory, so the Ukrainians were able to retrieve some of the parts of the wreckage. So I think it has been really embarrassing for Russia, and at the same time a potential intelligence treasure for Western countries and Ukraine as well.
Yeah, and all these situations seem to be a big wake-up call for us here in Europe to develop policy to counteract this, and of course to help Ukraine develop its own drones and jammers and other systems to counteract them. Well, I'd like to thank you, Federico Borsari, Resident Fellow, Transatlantic Defense and Security at the Center for European Policy Analysis. Appreciate your analysis here on Ukraine This Week. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And now, continuing on the thread of drones, of course, there's been nobody so important as the former president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko. Hello, sir. Great to see you again, and thank you very much for joining me on Ukraine This Week.
Thank you very much indeed for your invitation and for the reliable support of my country.
Yes, now, Mr. Poroshenko, we are focusing on drones this week. You and your foundations have been very active in supplying large amounts of drones, jammers, detectors to soldiers fighting on the front lines. So can you tell us a bit about your activity?
This morning, a couple of hours ago, I returned back from the front line. We were directly in Pokrovsk, and we have a meeting with the commander and representative of the 15th Brigade for the paratroopers, for our Marine, for our artillery, for our ground forces, for our intelligence, and we delivered them the special package, which was paid by my charity foundation. And every single week, I try to do my best to deliver for the amount €1 million per week. And my motto is everything for the soldier, everything for the army, and we do not have any other priority who can help us to save Ukraine, to stop the aggressor. And positively, we haven't used it on a certain part of the battlefield, on the touchline. The offensive operation of Russia was stopped. Unfortunately, we have a critical development of the situation in Selidovo, and I'm very much proud the progress we demonstrate for 2.5 years since 24th of February, because at that time we start with a helmet, we start with the arm jacket, we start with the boots, and now we delivered state-of-the-art radio electronic warfare system who counteract the Russian intelligence, the system with FPV drones, which has destroyed thousands of Russian aggressive forces, and we just to demonstrate that the war is changed. And this is not the war of year 2014, or even not the war of year 2022. Who can imagine that the cheap drones could damage and sometimes destroy the main battle tank of Russia? And drone is a part of the military welfare, and I think that the military strategy now is have a guarantee that this is the scenario of the strategy of the future war. And that's why we pay such a big attention to finance, to develop, to modernize, and to make more accurate and more anti-jammed technology with all these type of things. At the same time, we have like a parasol for the, again, radio electronic warfare, for the protecting against Russian FPV drones. And we, together with the combat unit, together with the soldiers, modernizing, delivering, financing, and producing all these type of things.
Yes, and some say the war of the future is actually taking place right now. Now, concerning the domestic military-industrial complex in Ukraine, well, it's really taken off over the last 2 or more years. How have you and your foundations contributed to the development and production of equipment needed on the front lines, and in particular, Petri and the breakthroughs that you've made there?
First of all, thank you very much for mentioning Petri. But I want to start with the year 2014, because exactly from this year, when I was the Supreme Commander-in-Chief of Ukrainian Armed Forces, creating the new army, we start to produce the ballistic missile Neptune. I want to remind you that the first months of the wild-scale war, we destroy completely the flagman of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, cruiser Moscow. We now completely destroy, by using the Neptune ballistic missile or cruise missile, the all Russian fleet, and now having the range significantly more than 150 kilometers, we destroy the ammunition storage, the oil reserve, and the headquarters of the Russian Federation, including the new missiles Polyanitsa. We developed the combat attack drones, unmanned, both also as a type of the missiles, which is very, very promising. And at the same time, I can tell you that we, this year, starting from the February, we launching the mass production of the Petro radio electronic warfare, who can stop and destroy Russian reconnaissance, UAV, Russian guided bombs, and another very dangerous things, saving the lives of Ukrainian soldiers, protecting these skies on the object of the critical infrastructure, and providing the evacuation of the wounded soldiers and building the shield on our artillery position. And I am proud that our investment, our finance of the state-of-the-art new technology is effectively protected against Russian modern weapons. And I want to give piece of advice to our partners in NATO member states, including Poland, that this state-of-the-art weapons is absolutely necessary to analyze and to know how it's work. Also for the Poland, because with the old technology, only with the weapons samples 10 years ago, now you cannot protect your land, your sky against Russian troops. With this situation, this cooperation is definitely wishable, and we now have also the new technology that the NATO member states can finance the defense industry in Ukraine for armed forces of Ukraine, for the access for the future technology in this war for the member states, for our partners.
Yes, and I just spoke to a U.S. administration official, and they seem to be of the thinking that it is Ukraine that needs to produce these long-range weapons, which Ukraine is currently doing, to hit the long-range targets deep inside of Russia. If that's the case, is more money which would be given to develop such weapons that are currently being used to strike those targets deep in Russian territory, would that make a difference here in the war? I mean, since the United States doesn't want to, and other NATO members don't want to sign off on Ukraine being able to use Western-made weapons to strike targets deep in Russia.
Yes, I very much welcome this initiative of our American partners, and I think that this is very promising that United States is already start to finance joint production, not only giving the money, but also share the technology, also share the knowledge. For example, we can produce radio electronic warfare system, and we would be more than happy to receive Italian, French, or American radar to make it more accurate. And this synergy from this cooperation is vital. I want to thank and appreciate the first country who launched this initiative, and that was Denmark. Country number 2 was Netherlands. Country number 3 was Sweden. Now we have a very positive experience for cooperation with the Great Britain, and now with the United States and Germany with the Rheinmetall. And I think that Poland, as our advocate, as our closest partner, should be shoulder to shoulder with us on these things. Another thing is the long-range missile. And I think that we still waiting the very important, vital decision from the United States and from Germany, from the United States to issue the permission for our troops to using a long-range missile on the legitimate targets on the Russian territory. And Taurus, this is the German, very, very modern, very effective missiles. And I cannot understand why Ukrainian soldiers protecting civilian targets on Ukrainian territory cannot destroy legitimate target on the Russian territory. Again, for example, we have now the data for the North Korean artillery shell, for the North Korean and Iranian missiles, and we do not have an opportunity to destroy it immediately when we receive this very sensitive information, because this is our joint war. and the victory of Ukraine, this is definitely in the interest of the all free world. And I think this is not occasionally that the Russia demand North Korean artillery shells, North Korean soldiers, Iranian attack drones, state-of-the-art, very modern, with a very high speed. And with that situation, we want to count on our partners. Another thing which is vitally important for us, this is invitation to NATO. Without NATO invitation to Ukraine, it would be no sustainable security situation on the continent. And with this invitation, we should have no compromise on the sovereignty and independence of Ukraine, like it was happening in Istanbul. It would be no victory without Ukraine's membership in NATO. No compromise, definitely, on the territorial integrity of Ukraine. No compromise on the army ability to protect Ukrainian territory and security in Europe. No compromise on sanction. We should cut Putin's ability to finance the war. And no compromise on any blackmail of Putin to not allow to close the door of NATO for Ukraine. With this situation, I definitely think that our future victory would be definitely very close to us.
Now, Mr. President, I'd like to ask you about German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's recent statement saying that he would not support an invitation for Ukraine to NATO. Is this something new for you, or is this typical of indecisive German policy?
I want to remind to the Chancellor Scholz year 1954. With that situation, some nations were against German membership in NATO. Can you imagine what's happening in the year 2054? Chancellor Konrad Adenauer will receive the invitation. At the end of the day, within 1 year, Germany start to be the member of NATO. Now it would be completely different security infrastructure, security architecture. And with this situation, we have a decision of the Bucharest summit of NATO, delivering for us the messages that the door of NATO is open for Ukraine. My dear friends, if the door is open, let us in. If door is closed, say it publicly with the explanation why. Why you stop the security process in Europe. And with this situation, I think that I want to remind also to the Chancellor that this is the cheapest way to stop the war. We need to win the battle on Ukrainian, not on the Polish or German territory. And with this situation, our unity with the partners in Europe, partners in NATO, and our unity inside the country is a very key, important factor of sustainable security situation on the continent.
The U.S. campaign, the elections are just around the corner. Does it make you nervous in Ukraine, one candidate or the other, and whether they will continue to support Ukraine?
I hate the idea that anybody tried to put Ukraine as a part of the internal policy or internal fighting inside the U.S. American elections definitely are for American people. And we are greatly valued the bipartisan, unique support, bicameral support of Ukraine. And I strongly believe that it will stay no matter who is the next president of United States. During my presidency, I do my best to keep the balance, to keep bipartisan support, and to have an opportunity, because we have a very key factor for that. The support of American people, no matter they're Republicans or Democrat, they're for freedom, they're for democracy, they're for free world. And because lose the war of Ukraine would be victory of Putin, victory of North Korea, victory of Iran, victory of terrorist world. And with this situation, I doubt that anybody will accept losing the leadership, global leadership of United States in the world.
Mr. Petro Poroshenko, former president of Ukraine, thank you very much for joining us on Ukraine This Week.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. And once again, we are very much appreciated for your assistance and support.
And last but certainly not least, I'm going to leave you with a short story prepared by my next guest, so check it out.
I'm in Nikopol to research the drone attacks on civilians here. Behind me you see Energodar and Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station, which was occupied by the Russian Federation in 2022.
Нікополь знаходиться в зоні активних бойових дій вже майже 3 роки. Обстріли у нас щоденно і цілодобово будь-який час. Страждають, звичайно, не тільки люди, а й будівлі, заклади культури, освіти, медицини. На сьогоднішній день, впродовж жовтня, ми відчували на собі і дронові атаки, причому, я ще раз повторююсь, цілодобово це може бути. І останнім часом почастішали обстріли реактивної артилерії, це ствольна артилерія, це більш руйнівна сила. Атаки дронів у нас в місті цілодобово. Це буває і зранку, і вдень, і ввечері, і вночі. Ствольна артилерія приєднується до цього між дроновими атаками. З початку обстрілів, тобто з 12 липня 2022 року. Це перший обстріл міста. І по сьогоднішній день ми маємо статистику з наростаючим підсумком. За цей період у нас загибло 61 мешканець міста Нікополя. Це цивільні громадяни, які ніякого відношення до військових не мають. І постраждалих у нас 465, тобто це люди, які отримали поранення під час обстрілів. Не розуміємо, куди вони цілять, яка їх мета. Тобто в розброс у все місто. Моя особиста думка, то я думаю, що це просто психологічний тиск, насильство над мирними мешканцями. У нас є дуже коротка відстань, десь 4,2 кілометри, десь в середньому до 6 кілометрів. Вчора у нас була атака до 12 години дня, обстрілювали місто, центр міста, безпосередньо поряд з виконкомом постраждали декілька житлових будинків багатоквартирних, іменно в результаті ствольної артилерії. В місті Нікополі до початку війни проживало 106 тисяч мешканців з урахуванням і дітей, і всіх. На сьогодні десь приблизно 55-60 тисяч, не більше залишилось. Я хочу, щоб світ розумів, що місто живе, місто працює і сподівається на скорішу перемогу.
And now I'd like to welcome Zarina Zabriskie, a U.S. journalist based in Ukraine, to discuss the next thread to the situation, the story of drones hunting civilians. Hello, Zarina, and thank you very much for joining us yet again here on Ukraine This Week.
Hi, Don. Thanks for having me, and thank you for following this story, which is definitely one of the most important stories of this modern warfare.
Absolutely, and you brought it to us, Zarina. You traveled from Kherson now to Nikopol and then Zaporizhzhia in pursuit of the next chapter of this Russians hunting civilians using drones. So what are you seeing there with Russian drone attacks on civilians? What's similar there in Nikopol and Zaporizhzhia as you've seen down in Kherson?
Thanks, Don. Yes, I have traveled up the Dnipro River, and I would like to start with just an overview of a bigger picture, because definitely Ukraine and this invasion are both defined by the Dnipro River, and you feel it here. You feel it both in Nikopol and in Zaporizhzhia. And for those of you who are a little rusty on Zaporizhzhia region, Zaporizhzhia is the bigger industrial city, only about a 1-hour drive from Nikopol, which is a small town, used to be 100,000, as you have heard, population before the war, where only about half of it left. And the unique thing about Nikopol is defined sitting on the powder keg. They have the biggest nuclear power station, Zaporizhzhia power station, right across the river. And you can actually see it from the streets of Nikopol, except for going there to enjoy the view might cost you your life, because drones are there. They are not at the rate of which they are attacking the civilians in Kherson yet, because I understand they have started a little later and they are not as intense yet, fortunately for Nikopol. It still feels very intense for those who are staying in Nikopol. I spoke to quite a few people in the streets, but that's already a difference because people can actually walk down the street. They are afraid. They do look at the sky. They try to listen for it. But you see kids, you see teenagers, you see people gardening. By now in Kherson, this is not possible because of the number of drones attacking civilians. So that's the first and foremost, the difference in intensity. The pattern is the same. They are hunting civilians. They are following vehicles. They are following ambulances. Several people mentioned to me cellular towers. I saw a car that was attacked, burned, with a family who suffered. The mother and one child were killed, and the father and the 4-year-old are still in the hospital fighting for their life. And I visited what used to be the prettiest part of town, the old historical area, Bogdan Khmelnytsky Square, which by now is completely empty. And there's just one person there who dared to be there, still looking after 7 dogs who live there. Everything around is burned and destroyed. And you could see that it's creeping up on Nikopol. As for Zaporizhzhia, it is, of course, is too far for small drones to attack it. But now we hear that the Russians are planning to get closer to the city of Zaporizhzhia so they can attack it with artillery, which of course is happening both in Nikopol and Kherson. And if they manage to do this, and we hope that they don't, we will next be looking at the risk of the residents of Zaporizhzhia being attacked by small drones.
Now, in terms of defense and protection for civilians, I mean, what do you think are the short and long-term solutions to the threats of these drones?
Very good question, Don. Thank you. Because usually everybody I speak to focus, of course, on jammers, on electronic warfare, which is fair enough and should be discussed and should be delivered to all the areas that are currently being attacked by small drones. And these are the short-term solutions. However, the long-term solution is definitely the long distance, high precision weapons that Ukraine needs to have in order to push the Russian positions far enough for the Russian forces not to be able to, as we say, go on their human safari on their peaceful cities and towns.
Yes, well, we're still waiting on more definitive decisions when it comes to that. Of course, Zarina, we're all hoping and praying and really hopefully pushing our politicians to do more to allow those strikes to happen so that we can turn the tides in this war. Zarina Zabriskie, U.S. journalist based in Ukraine, thank you, as always, for joining us on Ukraine This Week. And that's all for this edition of Ukraine This Week. Join us again next week for another summary of all the latest events from the war in Ukraine. Thanks for watching, and see you soon. Goodbye.